Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome to Figure Drawing Basics Part 10. I would like to start off with, right before I set up chat, I'd like to start off with a little review. As I mentioned before, it's nice to just refresh your memory about all the things that are important to keep in mind as you are trying to improve your drawing. And just generally, it's good practice to review, to just go back on your in your sketchbook and see what you've done the previous day. Maybe there's some notes that you don't remember specifically at the moment that are going to help you refresh your mind and help you focus more. Okay, so now that we have chat set up, let's jump into it. So the first thing you want to do to remind yourself, the very first important rule when it comes to drawing is keeping it light. Don't sketch hard. Don't press down, and keep it in mind as you're doing it. Like, am I pressing lightly? Also, what was the other? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Keeping it light, sketch out whatever it is that you're drawing. Don't go into detail immediately. Make sure everything fits into the frame prior to doing that, prior to jumping into detail. You don't want to spend all that time putting in effort and comparing and doing all this stuff just to find out that it doesn't even fit a page or it's disproportionate. So sketch lightly and keep it light throughout the entire time. The next thing that we want to jump into is the unit of measurement. Using the head as the unit of measurement, nothing else is better. The head proves to be the most efficient one, and we'll go through it one by one. As you could see, just if you were to use anything else, like if you were to use a foot, it's not as wide as the head. And having to use that more often in a body, it just seems like a waste of time. Why do that when you could just simplify it to less numbers to remember here? So, for example, 2 heads going across is the width of the torso. 3 heads going across is the width of the torso plus the shoulders and arms. 2 heads going down is the height of the torso from the neck down to the waist. Then we got the foot, which is about the same size as in terms of height as the head, but maybe the toes poking out just a little bit more. So it's slightly bigger than the head. You don't want to go beyond that. Then we got the hands. The hands are about 3/4 the size of the face. Then we got the leg here, the upper part of the leg, which is 2 heads going down, and that changes depending on whether you're drawing a 7-head figure or an 8-head figure. So for the 7-head figure, it would be about like a head and a half maybe for the top part of the leg. But yeah, for this example, it's 2 heads for the 8-head body. The width of it is just 1 head. Then for the bottom part of the leg, bottom part of the half, bottom half of the leg, we got about like, I guess 3/4 the width of the head. But it's also pretty easy to follow once you establish the base of the top half of the leg. And you could, from there, you could just continue the shape and notice how it tapers down to the ankle. Same thing for the leg. You don't want to draw it straight down. That's going to be bad. That's just not going to look right. Have like stubby legs or tree trunks for legs. You don't want that. But yeah, for both of them, it tapers down towards the bottom. Same thing here. Tapers down towards the ankles. And the height is the same. It's 2 heads with the bottom half going down about halfway through the foot. And moving on quickly, we got 4 heads in total from the top of the head down to the groin area. You got obviously the one head that you start off with, which is important. You know, the way that you draw the head on your page is going to determine the proportion for the rest of the body. So once you draw the head, it's no longer up to the reference. It's up to like whatever it is that you're referencing, a figure, a character, whatever else. It's going to be the head that you drew on a page. So you don't want to go and measure the head on your reference and then compare it to the body on the page. That's going to be confusing and that's going to be disproportionate. Once you draw the head, then it's going to be your reference for the rest of the body of the reference. So make sure you do that. You start measuring it and then you do it based off of that. What you could do is you could measure the reference, the head on the reference, and then use that to measure the rest of the body on the reference to see where it ends on the reference. And then you could just switch over to your page, measure the head of your drawing of the reference, and then use that to measure points on your drawing to know, okay, this is where it ends as well here. Hope that's not too confusing for you guys. If it is, leave a comment. I'll try to explain it a little bit better in the future. So yep, we got 4 heads in total for the top part of the body. You got it from the head itself, and then from the neck down to the chest, that's 2 heads. Then from the chest down to the waist, that's about another 1 head, and then from the waist down to the groin area, that's 2. Important note, make sure that when you're drawing the arms, if it is in this position, and just generally keep in mind that the tip of the hands, the fingers, are way past the groin area. Don't make the mistake of ending the hands like really close to where the groin area is, like right here, for example. You don't want to do that. You want to go well past, I'd say even maybe half a head. You know, let's just measure it for fun. Then we got this ruler here, which I speak of highly every time I mention it. It's pretty cheap. Found it at a dollar store for $1 with a bunch of other ones here. I don't know if you guys could see it, but there's a whole lot of them here. Yeah, clear. You could use it. It's helpful when you're measuring. You could see through. It makes the whole experience a lot easier. So as we said, maybe half the head, right? Let's just say half the head. Yeah, I would say it's maybe a little bit even more than that. Maybe about like 3/4 the size of the head. It goes past the groin area. So just keep that in mind. Don't cut it. Don't end the hands by the groin area. It's going to make things look weird. As you can see, it's the same measurement for the legs. 2 heads for the top half, 2 heads for the bottom half. So just to simplify it even more, just to remember, 4 heads from the top of the head to the groin area. Then we got half a head, half the head as the width for the forearm, with one head being the height of the forearm. Then it's about 1.5 heads for the width of the pelvic area, and again 1 head for the height of the pelvic area. So just something quick, this is really helpful in a lot of ways. You'll just, once you develop better understanding of anatomy in your mind's eye, once you develop this figure in your mind's eye, you can always just use it in your imagination as reference to when you are drawing something else and you're just like kind of stuck, you don't know where you're going with it, or something seems off. You could just refer back to it and be like, okay, these were the measurements for the forearm. It is 1 head in terms of height. It's about 1/2 head in terms of width. So if my forearm looks really chunky, let me compare it to the width. It's supposed to be 1/2 head, so let me do that. I'm going to measure 1/2 head and then measure it. And you could always eye it. It doesn't have to be extremely precise, even though I encourage it to pay attention to as much detail as possible. But it helps you as opposed to not referencing to it and just drawing it as you think it is and getting, really thick forearms when it just doesn't make any sense to the rest of the body in the proportion. Now, what's the next thing that we want to jump to? I think this is also a really important one. This one right here. Gradations. Practice your gradations. Get yourself something as flexible and small. It's about the same size as like my palm, or a little bit smaller actually than your entire hand. It's easy to put into your back pocket, in your pocket, in your book bag. It's small. It doesn't take up much space. Great paper. Well, for this brand rather. I enjoy it. Crescent, I like the quality of the paper. It's not too rough, not too smooth, just right in between. And just practice your gradations. It's mindless for the most part. The only thing you have to really keep in mind is highlights, midtones, and shadows, and to start off light. That's pretty much it. Start off light, and then you gradually press harder and harder, making sure that the transition from highlights to midtones to shadows is smooth. That's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. And it's fun. You fill up the entire page. It helps your hand-eye coordination. It helps you improve control over the pencil. Just physically, as far as pressing down on it, and as far as creating shadows and such. You want to develop a loose kind of relationship with your pencil. You don't want to be like gripping it tight, that ends up reflecting in your drawing. Your lines are really stiff, they're harsh. You don't want to do that. You want to learn the ability to be easy and free flowing with it, especially because when you're first sketching things out to make sure everything fits on the page, you don't want to restrain yourself in any way. You kind of want to be quick about it, just improve your speed in terms of what you see and what your hand puts down on the paper. And it's just a more pleasant experience. You're flowing through the page. You're not like rigidly making sure every single line is exact. It's the chaotic part of the drawing, which is fun. You don't want to rule that out. You kind of want to balance things out between just having free-flowing, chaotic kind of expression and then starting to take form and creating the shapes for defining the figure more, or whatever it is that you're drawing. And this helps. It just, you're not doing too much detail to knock you off this thought process of keeping it light. Making sure that you keep the highlights, midtones, and shadows smoothly transitioning. And then you could also play around with basic shapes. Start out with the circle. Notice how there's a curve to each one. You could start out by drawing a circle, then do a solid highlight over it from all around, finish it completely, fill it in with very light highlights, and then you could just gradually add the midtones all the way through, leaving place for the highlights. Just do a quick demonstration again. Really light, fill it in. And then, if you're beginning, I'm sure it's a little bit more difficult to create the gradation freehand, so you can give yourself a guideline. You could just add this little guideline to where the midtones start and just fill in that area with midtones. Making sure to feather around the border between the highlight and the midtone to give it more of a smooth transition. Then you can do the same thing for the shadows. Give yourself a guideline to where the shadows are, following a curve, the same curve for the midtones and highlights. And just practice to do it in layers. If it's not dark enough, go over it again lightly, getting a little bit darker as you go with it. And then you'll know how it instantly takes shape. Well, you'll notice that it takes shape. It gives it this like 3D effect. If you follow these principles. Then you could always use the eraser to give it that cherry on top look, where the highest point of the light source hits the top. There are a lot more gradations in between these three, but this is like the basic principle. Once you keep those in mind, it's easier to shade in between them. Yep, so that's pretty much it. I won't go into too much detail about other stuff. We'll cover them in another stream. Kind of want to jump into the session without spending too much time on it. We were doing range of motion in a previous stream to just illustrate the limits of our body parts. Let's just put it in simple terms. Just how far the body could stretch depending on the position of our body parts. So for the arm, if it's facing out, it's less likely that you'll be able to touch both hands, backhand to backhand, in this position. That's just an example. If you're standing completely straight without tilting left or right your torso, just completely straight, see how far you can actually extend your leg to the side in this motion. And you'll see that the limit is actually very accurate. It can't go past that. You can't raise it all the way at a 90-degree angle when you're standing this straight. Just our anatomy and our bone structure, how it's connected all together, the ball and socket, and pretty much everything else just limits us in that ability. Once the body starts twisting, that's a whole different topic, which is over here. Then it opens up another door of range of motions. So over here, we were just doing examples, getting more familiar, not just verbally, but physically, with the ball and socket concept, being able to draw these things. And again, improving your mind's eye, right? Your imagination. It's just another word for imagination. Your mind's eye to be able to remember the figure well. So you could refer to it. You won't need a reference. And that's just something that happens. The example was like your alphabet. You don't have to recite the alphabet from A to Z to remember what the letters sound like, etc. You don't have to pronunciate every single word before you read a sentence. You just read. And that's because you've developed it in your memory, in your ability to recite these words. So this is the same thing, but it's just visually. You're building that library in your head, and at some point you won't even need to remember, oh, there's a ball and socket concept here, here, and here. Just you naturally know the limitations because you've practiced it so many times. Same concept. Just training your memory in different ways. One is verbal, the other one is more visual. So yeah, by just drawing these out, by practicing this stuff, you develop, you increase your memory. Just the same way as we try to review this stuff every day so that it becomes more ingrained. It's the same idea with drawing all these features and concepts. You memorize it verbally and you memorize it visually as well. And of course, you're improving your hand-eye coordination, you're improving your muscle flexibility to be able to draw these lines over and over again. It's great practice. Also think of it as, when you're exercising, you want to start up with a warm-up. You want to start out with some stretches before you start doing any heavy lifting. And this is what this is. You're just doing some stretches. You're drawing these cylinder shapes. You're freeing up your hand. You're getting more confident. You're getting into the workflow of it, getting it into the zone, as they put it. With all these ideas, these concepts, so that you could start off strong, keeping it light. Also, keeping distance from, this is how beneficial this is. I wrote it down, now I remember, even though I was reciting other ones. I didn't keep this in mind. Keeping a distance from the tip of the pencil. You don't want to draw like this. This is like rigid land. This is where all your lines start to get rigid. You start micromanaging like every tiny little thing, and it's just uncomfortable. Like, I used to do it, but once I became more familiar with keeping a distance from the tip of the pencil, I've recognized how much better, how much easier and free-flowing it is to be able to create these lines. You have, speaking of all this, better range of motion with the pencil at that. With this, you notice how your hand moves around a lot more. Your fingers move around a lot more. Whereas with this, you cover a lot more of, let's say, this body part faster, quicker, and it just feels a lot more relaxed as opposed to, doing this. And it also obstructs your vision. When you're drawing with your fingers so close to the tip, it obstructs your drawing so that you could compare, like, well, how far did I go in the drawing? Your fingers kind of block the other side, for example. In this example, I can't really see it, whereas here, you see the entire drawing. And it just allows you to create forms while keeping an eye out on proportion. So it's a really important tip as well. So we did a little talk about foreshortening, but I won't get into that right now. And just doing examples of more of these ball and socket concepts, making sure the figure is balanced. This is a perfect example. Like, you don't want it to be tilting. That's the biggest mistake. One of the biggest mistakes, rather, that beginners make is they have the entire figure leaning towards the left or the right when the pose is calling for a balanced look. So this just kind of illustrates it, having to keep that in mind. And also how simple it is to draw the figure once you understand all these principles, once you understand how the entire figure is comprised of cylinder shapes, rather than you thinking, oh, I have to draw the muscles, I have to draw like all this like anatomical stuff. You simplify it into cylinder shapes, and mentally and visually, it becomes less intimidating to tackle on the figure. You're like, oh, I drew the cylinder shape plenty of times in my sketchbook, that little notebook, hint, hint. And it's becoming easier and easier. And since the entire body is pretty much, for the most part, is comprised of cylinder shapes, I could do it. You know, so the first hurdle to get over is just to start, right? And that's a great way to do it. You recognize that it could be simplified into, you know, these cylinder shapes rather than anything more complicated. So we're going to continue on with that for now. That was a really long review. It was half of the stream. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you like these reviews? Would you just prefer to like refer to the other streams for them? Goal is to do it every other day. You know, just, you know, again, there were so many things that I had written down, some things I forgot, and I'm sure for you guys, if you're just learning especially, it's more intimidating to keep all those things in mind every time. So I figured it helps, despite there are other streams being there with these reminders. It's helpful to do just a quick overview. Maybe I'll try to like speak about it less, so that way we have more time with actually drawing. All right, so let's get to it. I'm gonna start off with this one right here. I'm gonna do a quick sketch. Keeping it light, as mentioned. And a lot of the things that I'm doing lightly are also comprised of like simple shapes. Because I've drawn a cylinder so many times, now it's becoming my go-to. Because I remember when I was trying to learn, or rather fight off a bad habit of not sketching lightly, I would start off trying to draw light, but I was like, what do I draw lightly? You know, like where do I go with it? Just a bunch of lines and squiggles that don't really have much form. It was kind of frustrating because it was just like, what am I doing with this, with these light sketches? It didn't give me enough time to form anything really, because I just didn't have much of a reference. But after drawing cylinder shapes enough, after practicing all this stuff enough, daily, weekly, monthly, I started to see how it really became faster and easier for me to create those shapes, even while sketching. So just a general idea right here. Making sure everything is angled properly. Let me bring this up again. I don't want to go off screen. I do notice that happens. Gotta apologize for that, guys. I don't recognize how it's slowly shifting its way down. I tend to not trust the tape marking for some reason. And it also has to do with like how I set up the camera. If it's the same each time. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. I think that's what's kind of putting me off from being rigid about the tape marking. So now that we've established the sketch, we can start slowly shaping things like, it's a little bit to the right. So let me shift it over more to the left. And it's easier because nothing is really that defined. It's light sketched, so it's not as disheartening to erase. not as disheartening to draw over even. That looks huge. That hand looks huge. I'm gonna erase that. Taking note not to draw the foot too big. Again, the foot size is about the same size as the head, maybe slightly bigger. Slightly. I'm talking about just the toes getting a little bit past the top of the head, right? As we were reviewing from the previous, from the beginning of the stream. And since it is in perspective, it may be a little bit harder to judge. But you could, you know, by eyeing it, you could say, like, okay, it just looks way too big. You know, just using my best judgment in comparison to the head, it might be a little large, on the large side. So from start to finish, you guys saw it. Light sketch to forming a little bit more, and then from here you could add detail to it. You could use a different color pencil and start shaping it to be more what you're referring to or what you're trying to design. And then we're going to do another one, a quick one, sideways. And I also mentioned this in previous streams as well. I don't like wasting paper anymore for sketching. Not so much because of wasting paper, but just an opportunity to draw more. You know, And both, why would you want to waste paper when you're not really doing anything final or anything big? Use up as much of the page as possible, and at the end of it, you'll be proud to see how much work you've put into each page. It just kind of adds to it. I mentioned this in the previous streams. I'm just super ashamed. Like, I was looking through my old sketchbooks, and I was ashamed at how much space I wasted. Like, I would draw the head, not a big head, not something that even takes up close to even half a page. It's like 1/16 of the page. I would draw the head, and if it didn't come out right, I would just turn the page and move on to a fresh start, in a sense. And it just looked awful. Like, looking through those pages, I was like, what are you doing? Just erase it. And I think a lot of it had to do with, getting focused on detail again, a lot of it had to do with two principles, right? Just not being afraid to start fresh, which is great. It's a very important lesson as well in drawing. Don't be afraid to start fresh. Sometimes it's the best thing to do because you're spending too much time getting into the nitty-gritty detail, when you should be just doing light sketching at the beginning until it takes form with something that you're happy with. So sometimes it's good to scrap it, but everything in moderation. Like, sometimes it's good, other times, in cases like that, where I was wasting so much paper, it's a bad idea. It's sometimes better to just wrestle with it a little bit before you call it quits with that page and move on to something else. So I think for me it was part to do with that, and part frustration of just like, I don't even want to look at this because it looks so bad. So a little bit of both played a role in why I was wasting so much of the paper. I'd imagine that's how I thought of it. And I do remember points where I did feel that frustrated, so. But the other great thing about drawing on the same page as much as possible, filling up the space as much as possible, is you learn how to fit things next to each other. Sometimes you have to sometimes you have to draw one over the other, in a sense, overlap each other. And you have to learn how to do that, because even in comics, like, you look at comics, there's so many objects in the background and even in the foreground, and characters where their bodies are next to each other, or they're in the background of the main character in the focus, that you don't want to shy away from learning how to do that. So just, being able to draw all these objects in relation with each other. comfortable with the sketch. Now I'm gonna move on to doing more defined lines. And this stream also works perfectly for the next one, where I will be drawing comics. I will be drawing John Buscema's Conan the Barbarian, and learning from him as well. If you guys want to see more personal work that isn't referenced or, drawn by another artist, check out the project stream, which streams at 8 p.m. where I do some stuff that is from my imagination, some things that caught my eye and I'd like to capture. But next stream is going to be that. I'm just going to be learning more from him. I love his work, and it's also just, I mentioned this previously, it's just like reading. You're, instead of reading words, you're reading with your hands and eyes. In a sense, you're reading this person's creativity. What they create the characters a certain way, they draw lines a certain way, and you're just kind of living through it the same way as you're living through the story of a writer. So I do get a kick out of that. It's cool to get into their mindset and make the lines that they make and create the characters and backgrounds they created. And it's great practice. You learn a bunch of different things, like, at the same time. Perspective, how to create these panels, how to make sure things fit in the panels, how to make sure that you have speech bubble room, paying attention to the kind of backgrounds that they create and little details that make them. You practice anatomy, you practice hand-eye coordination, practice inking and coloring, all that without having to have the burden of producing the panels from imagination at the moment. Just improving your skills in general, that transition or transition into your own personal work. So next time you sit down, you do a panel, for example, and you're like, what do I draw in a background? Oh, you remember I drew this car from this comic book. I really liked how it turned out, and I'd sketched it out, so I could just sketch this out here and change some things here and there to my liking. But the foundation, the original point of it can come from you practicing from these comics and remembering, like, oh, it's this and it's that. You could also use references too. You could research some scenes, if you're looking for specific things in the background. That sort of thing. So there's multiple benefits to it. And then at 9 p.m. I watercolor these panels to practice watercolor, to get more familiar with it. Just in general, really love the brush and playing around with those mediums, getting the results that I'm looking for. It's fun to do. It's not bad. And then at the top here, I'm gonna do one more. And hopefully I could finish this before I need to end the stream to start the drawing comic stream. But I will be back tomorrow, same time and place. Gotta remember to sketch it out. It's by the looks of it and the size of that I started with. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit everything in here, but this is going to be an example of objects colliding with each other and how to just feel comfortable drawing those out. And in this example, you're seeing how just it's separated into all these different parts. And really, it's less so of a visual guide than it is just like physically practicing again, drawing these parts and understanding how they fit into each other. Too much, too long. This might not be the best example since things are colliding. But I kind of wanted to take that challenge on. Get comfortable with drawing objects colliding. That's pretty much it. It's kind of similar to this one, just kind of broken down into different parts of the body on their own. Just more practice of drawing these shapes in a sense. Granted, not the best example at the moment. It's not very clear, but it's more so for fun. But tomorrow, I'm going to be taking on a new section, new explanations and things to look out for. So you won't want to miss that one. It's going to be pretty fun to talk about, to discuss, just addressing some of the common mistakes that people make. I'll draw them out. I'll talk about different examples for it as well. Alright guys, this is it for the drawing figure basics stream. Stick around. I will be back in 5 minutes for the comic stream.